Pastors, elders, today's topic is really going to address what is going to happen with when this lockdown is over. I'm sure that you've been scrambling with trying to figure out technology and live streams, but eventually we're going to get back to normal. And today we're joined by Pastor Scott Krebs. Scott is the executive lead pastor at Alpine Church out in Utah. Scott, you've done a lot of research on this. You're actually leading our church through some of these conversations now. I appreciate that because we need to be ready for when we do open back up. But before we get to some of your recommendations, Scott, I guess maybe the first question is the church going to be gone now? Is the church over with now? Did the coronavirus just kill the church?
Well, that one I can answer clearly and emphatically because I know for a fact that no matter what happens in our world, the church isn't going to go anywhere. The church might change what it looks like, but it's not going anywhere. Jesus said he's going to build his church and the gates of hell won't stand against it. And so we know that now the church is needed as much now as ever before. And when you think of people's lives being affected economically, spiritually, emotionally, physically, the church is needed. And I firmly believe that God's going to do a big work in our communities, in our world through his church, even if it looks a lot different than what we might expect.
Yeah, I think that's good. For pastors and elders out there having this conversation, again, use this conversation. We'll put some questions down below that you can use to kind of guide this. So Scott, I appreciate that because I think that really shapes everything we're talking about. So now let's get into some of the details. One of the things that you have learned as you're reading and studying, I mean, it's anybody's guess, right? But one of the things I think we can all take to the bank is that we should not expect a quick return to things being normal.
That's right. I think right away, a lot of us thought, man, I can't wait for that first Sunday back. It's going to be awesome. And the church is going to be packed. And, it's going to be a celebration. I think the reality is that it's going to be a much slower path back to normalcy. In fact, we may never really in the next couple of years hit true normal. Even if immediately your government said, okay, you can go back to church, you guys can go to church again on Sundays, expect that a lot of people aren't going to be ready to go back to church. A recent study I read said that 73% of Americans would feel uncomfortable right now going to a sporting event. And just think of the fact that whether it's a gym or a movie theater or a church, people are going to be pretty uncomfortable going to a large gathering of people. And so I think, yeah, you'll have a core who's going to still be involved. They'll probably still show up, but a lot of people won't. So I would say continue. If you're doing live streaming services or, just some sort of online service, I would say continue to do that indefinitely, continue to do that in the future, because whether people are sick and they can't come or they have symptoms and they're quarantining themselves or they just don't feel ready to go back to church, that's going to be important. And I would also say most everyone is saying that quarantines are going to come and go for a while. And so you might have a thing where you can go back to church, but then a few months later in the winter, you can't. So I'd say don't get rid of those online services too quickly.
Yeah, so a lot of churches are figuring out now. I know we have multiple campuses at our church. So we're starting to do live streams. We didn't really do a lot of that before. So what you're recommending is, hey, keep providing an online option even when your doors are open again, because probably not everyone's just going to flood back into the church.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. And so I think that online service is going to be key to continue to reach new people, reach people who just, like I said, don't feel like they're ready to go back to the physical church location. So I think that's going to be key to continue to deliver that online service.
One of the other issues that we're starting to talk about with our staff and all of our campuses is what we should expect as far as leaders and volunteers. What are some things we should be thinking about proactively when it comes to that stuff?
Yeah, well, I think another side of it is think about how many volunteers you need, how many leaders you need beyond paid staff in order to run the church well, at least like you normally do. So, for example, you need kids' church personnel, right? That every church I've ever talked with, the hardest to staff is kids' church, nursery, all that kind of stuff. Are you going to have enough people to do that? Are you going to have enough tech people? Are you going to have enough worship people? If you're planning on doing services as normal, is that going to be feasible? What will you do if you can't find enough people to carry out that? What do you do if you're a smaller church and you have one worship leader and he's sick or she's sick, what do you do then? And then, what do you do with kids' church? Is kids' church even going to be open when you bring services back? We know our schools are shut down pretty much. Where I live, schools are shut down for the rest of the year. Probably pretty much most of America is going to be that way. And so our kids' church going to be open? If it's not open, how do you change your services in light of that, in light of having more families there? So I think these are some of the questions that we need to think about as it pertains to our leadership.
Yeah, I think that one of the questions people might be asking is it to my advantage to be a small church or a larger church? I mean, what are some things, because I think some of this is going to affect obviously budgeting and giving and things like that. So what are some things we can be thinking about depending on the size of our church?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question. And I think small churches, large churches have different liabilities and different advantages. And so I think it's probably worthwhile to think through some of that. If you're a smaller church in some ways, like let's say the government says, okay, you can start meeting in groups of 25, 50, 100, 200. You might be able to bring your church back to normal Sunday services faster than a larger church will. So that could be an advantage. If you're a multi-site church, you might have a situation where different counties or different regions have different restrictions than campuses in other counties. So that's something to consider. I think if you are a smaller church, then you probably every church needs to look at their giving, their finances to figure out, where their giving comes from, what it looks like. I'm sure at this point you figured out how much of your giving's online, how much of it came through, the offering plate or you got on a Sunday morning. And so I think trying to be realistic about what sort of gap you should see in your giving in the months to come or through the rest of the year. And, especially if your church is made up of people who are maybe small business owners or work in hospitality, restaurants, that kind of thing, let's face it, that's going to have a pretty significant effect. If your church is, maybe more white collar or jobs that are at this point less affected by the economic change we've seen, then maybe you can see less of a dip. So I think these are the hard conversations, the uncomfortable conversations that churches need to have.
Yeah, Pastor Scott, thanks for helping us think through this. Again, pastors, elders, leaders, we have resources down below this. Check out our resources at PursueGOD.org to help you be proactive about this pandemic. And this is stuff that none of us have ever really gone through before. We're all sort of guessing, but I think what we can do, what's biblical, is to really be prepared to meet online with elders and pastoral teams and talk through some of these issues. And so I encourage you to use those questions down below to do that, and use our other resources at PursueGOD.org. This is really a great time if you need online resources. They're free, they're accessible, stuff for kids, for youth, for couples, for men, for women. It's really sort of church in a box, and I think this is the kind of resource that many pastors are really looking for. So check out those resources down below. Pastor Scott, thanks for helping us talk through this particular topic. And pastors, don't forget, the church will not fail, because the head of the church is Jesus, and the gates of hell cannot prevail against it. So let's be prepared, let's be clear-minded, and let's see what God is going to do even through this whole lockdown.